The State of Real Estate with your host, Gerry Lantain.
Welcome to the State of Real Estate. I am your host, Gerry Lantain. We're going to get into the market report right away, and this is brought to you by the Lakeland Association of Realtors, the statistics, that is. We're going to be talking about September 21 to September 20. So the average price in Muskoka has risen by 23.3% over last year, and strangely enough, it has actually risen by 6.9% over August of this year. And people say that the market is cooling off this fall, but that statistic shows otherwise, and here's why. New listings are down over 15% from last September to this September, and they're also down from August of this year into September by 13%. So there's a lot less listings coming on the market, new listings that is. Now, total inventory of homes is also down by 21% over September last year. From August, the inventory has dropped by 4.4%. So in all of Muskoka in September, there were 387 homes for sale. That's not a lot of homes considering the amount of buyers that are out there, and this is why the market is where it is, with multiple bidding sometimes taking place. So actual sales over September last year, strangely enough again, are down by 31%, but there's such little inventory on the market that that's really not an indicating factor. The percentage of list price, this is a good one, is up 2.9% from last year at this time. On average, sellers are getting 100% of their asking price. And this was true for August of this year as well. Compared to earlier this summer when a lot of homes were going for over asking and much over asking. Number of days on the market, again, another good indication of how hot a market is. The number of days on the market is down by 45%. Last September, it took an average of 51 days to sell your home in Muskoka. This year, they're selling in 13 days. Unbelievable. So it is still a buyer's market. It is nowhere near a buyer's market. It is a seller's market. If you're buying, it's going to be very tough. You will more than likely have very few homes to look at, and the ones that you do look at will be being looked at by many other people, and you may be in competition for those homes. That's the market report for this week. We'll be back with our guest, Chad Schoppel, and talking about heating. So, the tip of the week this week, this is a monthly show though, the tip is really take care of your heat source maintenance. If you are having an HVAC system, you want to maintain that as well. You know, your forced air furnace could be as simple as just changing the filters every 3 months. Other equipment becomes more complicated, but it is an investment. Your heat source is an investment in your home, and you need to protect that investment by doing simple maintenance on a yearly or tri-monthly basis. That's the tip of the week, and that's the state of real estate.
The State of Real Estate with your host, Gerry Lantain.
All right, welcome back to the State of Real Estate, and as promised here, we are with Chad Schoppel from Ambient Air HVAC
Designs Inc.
And as we're moving into fall, we're going to talk about home heating. First of all, Chad, in Muskoka, on an average home, whether it's you're putting up for sale or it's being bought, what are the more basic heat sources for Muskoka?
Yeah, basically a forced air furnace would be the most popular, and mostly propane in this part of the world. If you live in town, you'd be lucky enough to be on natural gas.
Okay.
And
sometimes oil?
Sometimes oil too, yeah. Sorry, I shouldn't leave that out. That's getting less and less, but there's definitely a lot of people with oil out there still as well.
Okay, so there's one good source, forced air.
Yeah, forced air, and then hydronic would be the next big one.
And hydronic is basically water heat, in-floor heating?
Yeah, you'd have a boiler with radiant in-floor heating.
And or radiators in your house?
And or radiators, yep. So
okay,
it's,
there's
yep.
two.
Those would be the main ones. Other than that, electric-based forms of heat in older cottages and stuff like that, where you'd see electric baseboards and that sort of thing. That was common long ago and not so common anymore, and it's going to be a lot more common going forward as homes get more efficient.
You're saying that. And then supplemental heat usually from a wood stove.
Yeah, wood stoves are very big. Most of the designs I do, I'd probably say 7 out of 10 designs I do have a wood stove, and that's a lot of it. People understand that you know the power goes out in this part of the world, and usually in the stormy season, which we're in the fall right now, we're just getting into. So that's always a nice no power backup heat.
Okay.
I have one in my house, which we definitely lean on for that.
So there are 4 basic forms of heat source for Muskoka.
Yep. Ventilation as well is extremely important.
Yes.
The,
What's the difference between forced air and then forced air with ventilation then?
So heating and ventilation go hand in hand, but they are two completely separate things. Old ventilation would be through bathroom exhaust fans and a kitchen range hood that would be vented outside. So those just took air from the house and blew it out, and relied on the fresh air from outside to infiltrate and find its way in somehow. The new way, and any new house being built today by code has to have an HRV. An HRV is a heat recovery ventilator, and that's the central ventilation system.
So there are vents in the house that pull heat back in to...
Don't think of it heating. That's the thing. It's two separate things. So,
Okay.
So heating's one thing, ventilation's another. So if you're on a radiant system, you have no forced air distribution system.
That's right. The heat is radiating off of the radiators,
or out of the floor. Yep.
or the wood stove.
Yep. So if you have a radiant system or a wood stove, even pre now, you had to have a dedicated HRV system by code. So you'd have a small ductwork system that has to supply fresh ventilation air to every habitable room in the house, and an exhaust or an extraction point, which is usually a little round diffuser, in the bathrooms, and 6x10 grill in your kitchen somewhere on the wall.
So then the ventilation system just takes bad air from inside and replaces it with clean, good air from outside.
The simplest way to think of an HRV, it's the lungs of your house. So
Cool.
it's breathing and it's
cleaning.
And the idea that runs low speed 24/7, always on in the background, keeping the air exchanged in your house at a very low volume, so most people wouldn't even hear it running. They typically run low and high speed. So on high speed, it does a maximum intermittent amount, which you would hear a little bit. But really important system. Really important to exchange the air in the house. It controls humidity very well in the winter. You got to be a little careful if you overventilate with an HRV in the winter. You can really dehumidify or really dry your house out.
Okay.
So knowing how to use your HRV and set the controls properly is really vital to its operation. And the fact that it's balanced is a huge thing. Every house that it's in is a different thing, a different entity, and the HRV needs to be set up to move the proper amount of air for the house.
Okay.
And then, because it runs all the time and it's bringing in outside air, cleaning it and maintenance is probably, out of all the things in your house, keeping your HRV clean and serviced is probably the most important thing.
All right, we'll talk about that in the second half.
Yep.
Efficiency of the 4 main sources of heat for Muskokan homes. What would be generally the most efficient?
So it's
or is there even something to say that?
I can answer your question quick. The most efficient heating system is a very efficient building envelope. So I consult with people all the time that say, oh, you know, what's the most efficient thing I could put in, a furnace, boiler, whatever? And I'm like, well, it doesn't matter really, because it's all heat loss. So if you beef up your building envelope, put in triple glazed windows, building code is a really crappy minimum, and it's gotten better with SB12, which is a energy efficiency part of the building code now that's going to take us towards net zero. I believe it's a really good thing. Homes are getting way more efficient, but the best thing you can do is try and, if you're going to build efficient, is save money on your heating system and take the money you saved and add that into extra insulation, extra building performance. Because if you have a really, really airtight envelope, you're not losing much heat. So then you don't need much of a heating system.
Okay.
It's all related.
I got to watch the time to see where we are. I know we got commercials coming up. I don't know how soon they are, but we'll have some commercials, so we're going to have to go break away soon. But you were mentioning something before we started filming, and I thought it was very interesting because did not know this, about different temperatures and the proper tool to heat your house with. So if you have a wood stove and or radiant heat and or forced air furnace, what if you had all 3 of them, or baseboards even? You mentioned something about temperature differences and the best way to use your heat sources.
Yeah, so we actually live in a really interesting climate.
I didn't know this either.
We actually live in a very interesting climate, and when you're climatized to a climate, you kind of take it for granted, and you're used to it, and you don't maybe see how extreme it is. But we know in this part of the world, our outdoor winter design temperature for this part of the world, so the coldest average that I do all my heat losses and designs to and sizing of equipment is minus 26 degrees Celsius. which is pretty cold.
And it gets colder.
And it gets colder than that. And so right now, here we are in October, and it's probably, normally around 10 degrees. And we're going to go through probably about an 8-month cycle of, hey, it's a little cold now, to, oh man, it's getting really cold, to it's extremely cold. And then, yeah, I know. And then we got to work our way back out of that. So traditionally, we've said, okay, well, let's just put in a furnace, and that's going to get us through. So not really, because I'm sizing it, or it's being installed as per a heat loss, hopefully, which is at the average coldest temperature of the winter that only literally happens for 2 or 3 weeks out of the winter. So every home has way oversized HVAC equipment or heating equipment for the majority of the heating season, which is a bit of a problem. So the industry tries to sell one thing because, of course, the guy making the one thing wants to make all the money. But if you can spread the efficiencies out to relate to what works best at what temperature is the best.
That's what I want to talk about. What works best at what temperature? Because this is really interesting.
Yeah, so maybe I'll give you my example, because this is how I figured this out, and it's definitely on point. So I've got a high-efficiency condensing 2-stage propane furnace. 96% efficient, that's kind of the norm. I put it in about 12 years ago. I went a little above and beyond back then, just because I'm in the industry. I put in a air source heat pump. Air source heat pumps are basically central air conditioners, so they cool your house the same in the summer as an air conditioning would. They have a reversing valve in them, so when you want heat out of them, it just flops the whole system over and it absorbs heat from outside and rejects it inside. So they work really good, average ones. There's very high-end ones now that work down to like -30. They're very expensive. An average one's going to work really well to 0 Celsius or -5. So at those temperatures, the heat pump, from now till freezing, the heat pump uses electricity to operate, but it gives you about 2 to 2.5 kilowatts of heat energy out for every kilowatt of energy it uses. So it's actually 200 to 300% efficient, whereas your propane furnace is about 96 at best under optimum conditions.
Okay, so is that because the temperature's lower, it's not so cold yet?
Yeah,
higher?
As it gets really cold, there's less heat energy in the air.
So the heat pump won't work.
So the heat pump doesn't work as well.
Okay.
And they're two separate curves.
And what temperature is that?
So they call it a balance point, and it's different for every house.
Okay.
It depends on the heat loss rate and the size of the equipment and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, the spring and fall, so literally 3-4 months out of our 8-month ride or so of winter, air source heat pump will do 100% of your home heating at the most efficient rate available, and it's gonna work the best in its prime efficiency range. In my case, then we go to our high efficiency propane furnace from about freezing to -5, -10. Every house is going to have a bit of a difference where you feel the cold all of a sudden come in at what temperature. It relates to a whole bunch of factors.
So from freezing to -10,
we're going to lean on the propane.
Is the best time to have your propane furnace working?
In my eyes, it is, although the furnace is kind of good all the time. But I want to use it as little as possible because that's kind of the worst fossil fuel. It has the biggest greenhouse gas emissions or climate impact. So we use that device the least, and then when we get it's funny, our house, we hit a wall around -8 where all of a sudden any colder, we can feel the cold all of a sudden. We have an older house. Then I'll burn wood. So now I can burn wood efficiently because it's really cold and we need to really get the fire going to give us the heat we need so we can burn a clean, efficient fire. So we're using each 3 of those types of heating systems within certain temperature ranges to get the peak efficiency out of them. And
what was the peak efficiency for wood stove burning?
Wood stove burning is not efficient. They're probably 40%, I'm going to say. I'm probably a little off on that, but it'd be around there. So it doesn't sound good. But the nice thing with heating with wood, it's carbon neutral because when a tree falls down in the forest and dies, it's going to release its carbon anyway. So if you burn it, it's almost a cogenerative thing, right? Where you're actually getting something for that carbon release.
Right.
So it's actually wood's the most responsible heat, even though it's not that efficient. We were chatting a little bit about this off camera about it's too bad that the efficiencies of wood burning appliances actually haven't followed suit with
everything else.
Oil and gas industries' efficient products. So, but that'll come, and there'll be big advancements. I think that'll come with that.
Okay. Well, this sounds like a good enough time to cut away for a little bit of a commercial. We'll be back shortly with Chad Schoppel.
The State of Real Estate with your host, Gerry Lantain.
All All right, welcome back to the State of Real Estate. I am your host, Gerry Lantain. We were talking about heat sources, and everything to do with heating with Chad Schoppel from Ambient Air.
HVAC Designs Inc.
Woohoo! He's good. All right, so that was really good information on the first episode of the first half of this episode about the types of heat sources, and that should give people a really good idea of if they're looking to upgrade in their homes or do anything like that, or buy homes with furnaces, that kind of thing. And so now I want to talk about, getting, well, first of all, we'll talk about maintaining. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about if you bought a home and say it had a fairly good envelope, mm-hmm. and it had a furnace either that was very old or electric baseboard heat and you didn't want to use that. What then would be, how do you decide what's going to be the better heat source for your house? I mean, you could retrofit hydronic in, is that right? Or is that's really difficult?
It comes down to a case-by-case thing, and I always tell people now it's all the heat loss, heat gain. So you do the math first and then have the conversation. So the math first is taking, every house's system is completely different. Maybe the easiest way to say it is houses are like snowflakes. So it's really hard to blanket, unless it's a subdivision of every exact same house one after another, then you can start to make those mass assumptions. So you got to do the calculations. So that's basically a set of plans. We'll do the heat loss, heat gain modeling, and that'll spit us out a total heat loss at our winter design temperature, and it'll give us a total heat gain based on our peak summer design temperature. So once we have those numbers, we can say, okay, well, this is a bigger house. It's got a heat loss of 80,000 BTUs and heat gain of maybe 6 tons, or let's say 5 tons. So 80,000 BTUs and 5 tons. Well, the biggest air conditioner you can put on a single furnace system is 5 tons. So if you have you have an overglazed house with a lot of windows, you can have, it's not that abnormal in a big house to have a lot more solar gain than 5 tons. Now you need 2 furnaces, maybe not because you needed the heat, but because you got to handle the cooling somehow.
Right.
So bigger houses we built the city on rock and roll, which is fossil fuels, and we've all gotten spoiled on it. So we all have a reliance now on this stuff, and if we're going to keep rolling inefficient, then we have to throw lots of energy at it.
Okay, so there's no cut and dry answer to get a forced air or go with hydronic heat.
Well, so you can talk about there's pros and cons and comfort benefits to each. So hydronic heating or radiant heating from the floor, from radiators, there's no air movement. So our little hairs on our arms and stuff, that's evaporation, so we perspire, and that's our heating or climate control system, are the hairs on our body. So we rely on mechanical means to actually create those climates in our homes where we feel comfortable. So radiant systems are traditionally touted as more efficient, and the main reason they say that is that you can run it at maybe 68 degrees Fahrenheit and feel the same comfort level that you would with a forced air system running at 72 degrees Fahrenheit. And the reason that is because radiant is static or stagnant heat. So it's radiant,
not moving around the house.
There's no air movement, subtle convective currents, that sort of thing. Forced air, it's turbulating the air. That's how it gets the heat around. So air starts blowing over your skin. Ooh, I feel a little cooler. We're going to need a few degrees warmer to feel comfortable. So that's how the radiant industry kind of gets their foot in the door on saying that radiant's more efficient. There's a whole bunch of other reasons I won't get into where it can really not be as efficient and that's more installation issues that don't tend to get done properly.
Okay.
Because they're such expensive systems residentially. A lot of people don't have the money, and heating guys don't have the time and can't quote the proper way to do it, or they'd never be able to sell a job. So there's this kind of balance of, well, we'll do the radiant system and this is what we're going to do, and everybody else can do the same thing, and it's great, but it always could be better. It's easier to screw up radiant systems. Forced air systems are a little more forgiving.
Sure.
Because there's more ranges of control and that sort of thing with the furnaces, and able to, you can balance airflows really easy. With
the radiant's a lot more complicated with all the pipes and water or whatever, hydronic fluid running everywhere. So.
Yep. So I'm more of a forced air guy, and this is, again, my opinion, for the sole reason that forced air is way more adaptable, and that's why it's so popular. It's the best bang for your buck heating system. Forced air systems, you can leave your furnace fan running. It's going to run that air through the filter. It's got to get through the filter to get through the the furnace, so that adds a certain level of air cleaning to your house, and there's a lot of different filter options you can get into to increase that filtration. You can add the air conditioning onto it. You can add air source heat pumps onto it, which is really good, and that is kind of the future that's coming. And air movement's a good thing. I remember going out west to BC one time, and my buddy was like, man, it's weird if you'll see some cars, if they've been sitting under a tree in somebody's yard or whatever for over a certain time, little bits of mold or moss will start to grow actually on everything. And that's a kind of an airflow problem. Right. You're not getting good air circulation. It's damp all the time. If you're not getting enough sunlight, well, that's the recipe for that to grow. So I've seen homes with stagnant air, and if you just had radiant heat or electric heat and you didn't ventilate properly, you're more prone to having indoor air quality issues than you would be with a forced air. Just by the sake of the air moving is better.
Just a little advice then, if you have radiant heat, then you definitely want to have a good HVAC system in your house.
If you have radiant heat, you have a dedicated HRV system, dedicated ventilation system,
heat return.
And you want to make sure you know how to use that and you use it properly. And that's your installing HVAC contractor is who you should lean on for that. The other beauty thing of our trade I've noticed, doing a lot of design work and having to know a lot of different equipment, the internet's been great for that. A lot of manufacturers in our industry publish all of their brochures, technical data, installation manuals. That can get a little dangerous sometimes if you get a homeowner reading an installation manual, because it's the same thing your installer's reading to put it in. But it is supposed to, obviously that's for qualified people that understand the whole of the information and what they're doing. So, but it is really good as a homeowner if you want to educate yourself. There's a plethora of information out there on how to operate things, and maybe so much that it gets a bit confusing for people if you get too much information. So that's where it's best to lean on your HVAC service company or your HVAC installer.
Give them a call and say, come on over, let's have a chat.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, Chad, thank you very, very much. You've been an excellent guest.
This has been great, Jerry. I really appreciate it.
And we will have you back in the future to talk about that subject you were saying. What did you call it?
The electrification of things. Yeah. Dun, dun, dun. And the carbon tax and how yeah.
Okay, well, that might be the future, but that will be a future episode of The State of Real Estate. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
The State of Real Estate with your host, Gerry Lantain.